Hey everybody, welcome to Endless Studios, casting to you on, I don't even dare say what day it is, right,
No,
Brian?
after the debacle yesterday when I didn't know what day it was, it's treacherous. However, I'm happy to say it is Thursday today.
I'm so glad. And I also see you're sporting some Yankees gear. You look sharp this
Well,
afternoon.
thank you. Yes, so supposedly today is the day where there's going to be baseball again, which is exciting. And tonight, if they don't get rained out, which is a distinct possibility, it's the Yanks and the Nationals, defending world champion Nationals, playing in an empty stadium in Washington D.C. with Dr. Fauci throwing out the first pitch.
Oh my gosh. What a world we live in.
You know, who would have thought, like, on opening day of baseball last year, that yesterday we were talking about playing in an empty stadium with a leading infectious disease expert throwing out the first pitch.
Ugh, the plague years,
The
you
plague
know?
years. Hello, Ronan. Ronan is here also.
Yay! Saying hi to Ronan in the chat. And I'm so glad you are joining us, Ronan. And hopefully, we'll see some other folks roll in here for another hour of game making in Unity and general just game talk with Natalie and Brian. We're coming in towards the end of our second week here in the pilot for our Endless Studios summer camp. And I'm excited as always. When am I not excited about this stuff?
Rarely, very rarely.
It's just my baseline state. Um, but yeah, today, obviously excited about doing some more coding, working on our VR shooting gallery Unity project. And of course, we want to answer your questions. If you're a member of the pilot, obviously now is the time to chat with us and let us know where you're at. Um, I've been chatting with a couple folks on Discord today. We resolved some issues with a bug in the Endless Mission and Ms. Rogers' project. And Ronan, I actually replied to you in the Ask an Instructor channel. If you're listening, you'll see my reply there. Um, Great questions to both of you guys and anybody else who is interested in getting their questions answered. Don't hesitate. So today we have a full slate. We have a potpourri of things.
Very full
That
slate
was our
and very hopefully as good smelling as potpourri.
Oh yes. The sweet smell of game development. Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's usually not, and I usually is not. I've been in studios. It's usually not. But anyway.
Right. So I think the plan today is we're going to check out a game by Christopher. It's a Gamestar game. And then after we're done checking that out, I'm playtesting that today. We will hop back into our Unity project. Brian's going to wrap up some stuff about multipliers, talk to us about source control, and then I will be your tour guide for the Wave Manager system, which we will be implementing and testing out today. Does that sound good,
I am
Brian?
looking forward to surfing the Wave Manager system.
I am also looking forward to serving some waves. So I'm just over here right now, logging into Gamestar so I can pull up Christopher's
All
project.
right, let me
Is
know
there
when you're ready,
anything
and I'll
else?
when you give me the go ahead, Natalie, I'll pull up your screen.
Yeah, yeah. Is there anything else I missed, Brian, or do you think we can just roll right into that game?
No, I think that's good. It's going to be very varied, and we're going to do a little hand it off here as we talk about different stuff. But looks like you're ready, so I'll bring up your screen, and there we
I
go.
am ready. Yes. All right. So, one thing that's very exciting about this is in fact my computer screen. And this whole time you guys have been mostly seeing Brian's computer, but through the absolute wonderful magic of technology and the internet, we're now on my laptop. Woo!
You've
So
totally
I've
jinxed
got,
this not to work now that you've set it up so
I know,
effusively, but that's okay.
I know. Yeah. So guys, of course, if there's a glitch in my size and I shrink like Alice in Wonderland, you'll know that my jinx, you know, the universe was listening when I said that just now. So, on that note, we've got a game from Christopher. Congratulations to Christopher for finishing a prototype of a GameStar mechanic game. I chatted with Christopher on the Discord, and the conversation was that this is a super basic prototype, kind of easy And so, Brian, I'm thinking we should just check it out real quick. And, you know, I think it might be a shorter game than the other one we played on the cast. So we'll be prepared to give some feedback and maybe some
No,
inspiration.
that's and I'm glad that you shared that background on it, Natalie, because I think knowing that it's a prototype and that where the goal is really to just kind of showcase some ideas and some mechanics, we can give feedback in that spirit.
Exactly. And one of the things I always like to encourage people when we talk about this is if you say, this is an early prototype, the feedback is different, right? Like we wouldn't be as critical because when you're in an early stage, it's about getting ideas and momentum and inspiration. And we're not here to be like, well, this is unfinished, because of course it's unfinished. It's a prototype, right?
We understand. We are all sensitive people.
Cool. So we've got level 1 of 3 here, and we'll sort of take a look here at the parameters of this. We have sneak inside the factory and steal the gold, collect 25 points, complete all goals in 1 minute, can't lose all your health. It looks like I have 3 hit points here, and I need to hit the goal block. All right. Now, the walking and chewing gum thing applies, so I will try to comment, but perhaps Brian, your commentary will be the one that we prioritize since I'm going to try not to be terrible at Gamestar
Got it.
mechanic.
Okay. So we've got a quick first level platformer
Yep.
mechanics. Love the use of the blocks here to fill in and create a complete sense of the level. I think that's great. And, we're establishing some mechanics very clearly, the platforming, the time pressure, the coin collection. Let's see if those continue as we go through.
Yep. I know that was quick. I expected it to go on for like maybe 2 more frames. And that reflects what Christopher said, which is that it's easy and early. All right, so here's level 2. Boing! Looks like I need to get a lot more coins here. Gosh, it's over 1,000 points. And we've got similar parameters, but less health in this one.
Okay, so over 1,000 points now, but still a minute. Okay, interesting.
It's sort of a Sonic type
Yep,
thing
very
there. Ooh.
Sonic-y kind of feel. The points are being used pretty effectively here to guide you through the level. Not that you had a lot of choice in the beginning, but even that kind of works. I'm not sure what those enemies are doing hanging around there because they can't really do anything or get you.
Yeah.
We have the blue light and the red light, or the blue pill and the red pill, Natalie, if it's the ones that make you
Oh,
shrink.
oh my goodness, I fell down. Okay, so we can die there. I was actually trying to drop down there to avoid the enemy,
Sure you
but
were.
that's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. Yep. So yeah, these guys, those are pretty easy to avoid. I think I did kind of make an assumption that that dynamic would be reflected over here.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
which is why I just sort of was like, oh, like I can just jump down there and then jump back up when he's out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some, oh no, I did it again. So one thing you'll find out, Brian, I feel like, you're not always there so much at the in-person studios when I do this project, but I'm really bad at jumping in GameStar Mechanic. The students are always commenting on it, like, Natalie, we just jump over that. And I'm like, I
Now,
can't. I don't know what my
what
problem
control do you
is.
use to jump, Natalie? Do you use the up arrow or do you use the X key?
I do use the up arrow. I feel weird using X because I think yeah, it would be my other hand.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Some people
I'm
find
used to
that easier.
using,
I also find the up arrow easier.
yeah, I think I'm used to using the um, space bar to jump, but we know that in GameStar. Oh no. Okay. Let's see if I can get that.
Yeah. So here's one tip about this is, and I don't.
Oh,
Oh, so close. Nice.
all right. Go ahead and talk while I rebeat
Yeah, yeah,
this.
yeah. So this is a very nitpicky tweak about GameStar games, which is when you have a high and like irregular number of points like this that you have to collect, it can be helpful in your level descriptions to indicate whether you have to collect all the points or not, because that would clue Natalie in if she missed a point like she did there, uh, if she had to go back and actually collect it, or if she can afford to miss any. And if your intent
Right.
is not to miss any, then then you're in pretty good shape. And that was indeed the intent. And we got it. Nice, nice, Natalie.
Ha ha.
I mean, I actually feel like that level was pretty nicely balanced because, especially after you saying that you're not a great jumper, Natalie, when you look at how the time played out in your first couple of attempts, you have that section where you have to potentially wait for the enemy patrols to pass before you can continue. So that may eat up some time. I mean, I think that was a pretty well balanced level. I thought that was pretty solid.
Yep. I enjoyed it. I was, of course, I don't stream normally, so I always feel under the gun when we're on
Mm-hmm.
here, and I have to, you know, be good at a game. All right, steal the gold, level 3. Um, no time pressure here, just 5
And
health.
no point collection.
Oh yeah. Looks like I'm just focused on avoiding enemies and not falling down into those. We got some skill checks here on the jumping.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So it does look like I can go down here. Okay, here we go.
Now there are
Okay.
points, but they don't necessarily mean anything. Got a
Yep.
checkpoint there.
Yep. Which is nice. I love when people put checkpoints in Gamestar games for the reason of what you saw with
Yep.
me in the previous game or the previous level. And here's some hidden goal blocks, and here's the big one. Cool.
Cool.
That was actually a nice little progression there. I was expecting to see it a little bit looser than that, and I had some fun moments in that. So let's give our thoughts overall, Brian.
So I'm going to disagree slightly with that. So again, I thought in general the balance and the tuning was pretty solid. I like the consistent set of mechanics. I like the level designs and the use of the GameStar blocks. I thought that they actually created a nice sense of space and like using. I love when people use the grass blocks and then the dirt blocks underneath it to create like a little grass and dirt effect. That's pretty cool. What I would say is I kind of lost the thread on the third level a little bit because I think we dropped the timer mechanic. We kept the coins in the level, but dropped the requirement to collect them. And I thought that that level was actually therefore easier than the second level. So we had the difficulty go higher, higher, and then drop instead of kind of increasing over time in a more steady way. So I would look at, I guess my suggestion would be looking at that third level, seeing if we want to get, the point collection and time pressure back in, and then calibrating things in such a way where that third level actually is more challenging than the second.
Yep. I agree with that. It had an interesting kind of triangle of difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
It was like easy, super hard, easy. Um, my suggestion was going to be to sort of add on to what you suggested. Um, I thought it was a little weird that you had different amounts of health in every level. And
Mm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that's for narrative reasons because when I think of like there's a little person in a level, I think that person generally has the same amount of health. And so if you have a level where it might be useful to have like say 5 hit points instead of 3, you might consider always starting people out with 3, but then giving them a health power up somewhere in the level to collect. So you're secretly giving people more health, but you maintain that consistency in the game system.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation, and I like your solve there. That's not something that would have occurred to me, but it creates more of a sense of identity of the character because people get used to their avatar being a thing that continues across the levels, and so it's like, oh, why did he just get more powerful all of a sudden?
Exactly. Yep. And that returns us to that idea of that holding things consistent that we talked about in Ms. Rogers'
Yep,
project.
exactly. And one other quick observation is I did really like the first level because I think that sort of quick level that just gives you the sense of the avatar's feel and what the mechanics are without too much challenge, especially when it's like just a little over one screen like that one was. That can often be an effective technique, and I think it worked there.
I agree with that. Yeah. I think that was really nice. And maybe just a little work on that third level to kind of continue the thread is if I were starting revisions, iteration on this, that's where I would
Yep,
start.
I totally agree.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, I think we should do some Unity stuff. What do you think?
Let's do that. So let me hop over and share my screen for a second. So, Natalie, you and I are going to trade off a little bit today. I've got a little bit to wrap up, and then we're going to hand things to you. So just to review where we're at there on Unity, here's our implementation plan again. Yesterday we finished the base support for crits in the weapons system that we'll need to do a bunch of stuff later. And today I want to finish up doing a similar thing, which I think will be very quick because I'm going to do it fast. Because it's not much different than what we've already done with crits, but to get the scoring multiplier support in there. And then, Natalie, we're going to hand things off to you, and you're going to lead the implementation of the Wave Manager system.
Yep.
Cool. So let's go back into Unity. And this pattern is almost going to be a review, as I say, of what we did yesterday, because now we want to add that base support for multipliers in the game. And the natural question when you're going to do multipliers, we knew that crits were something that had to do with the weapons, and that the weapon, the place where we had to do that work ultimately was in the laser bolts themselves to do the base support. A similar question is where do we have to go to do that in our with our multipliers? And if you think logically about multipliers for a second, a multiplier has to do with adding to your what, Natalie? I asked that like you don't know.
Your score?
Your score is correct. So I think the place in this game, and I realize I probably should have checked this before we started, where that lives is in something called the game manager. A game manager is a very, by convention, a very common thing we use in games, and in particular in Unity games. And what a game manager represents is it's like a high-level thing that manages the sort of intangible system-y aspects of your game. Things like tracking your score, things like if you have other logic about saving and loading, or the condition of things in your game, win-loss conditions, that often lives in your game manager as sort of a centralized place to have that. So in our hierarchy, we can see an object representing the game manager. And there is a script associated with that called Game State Manager, which is the script we've created to do those things. And that's a component on that game manager object. And so let's take a look at that script and look at the inspector members. And let's look, and I'm going to inspect my script. Yes, and if we look here, there is a variable in this script called m_score, which represents the player's score. And somewhere in here, if I look at the code for what this thing actually does, let's see where this would be. Well, that's not where I was expecting it to be. That's interesting. I don't remember this game's architecture as well as I thought. So the score lives here, but where is the code that's responsible for updating the score?
So that is actually in drone damage.
Oh, interesting. That's
Yep.
how I did it. Yeah, I probably
Yep.
wouldn't do it that way. But that's okay, because we actually still want to do something here, which is this. So similar to what we did with the crit implementation, we need a way of knowing if there is a multiplier and storing data about what the multiplier value is. And I think the right place to do that is still in the game manager, because that is where the score itself is scored and stored, and the multiplier relates to that. So just like we did with the crit value, what I'm going to do is add a new property to the game manager script. We're going to call this one m underscore multiplier. And its type is going to be float again. And we'll give it a tooltip. And let's give it, again, for similar safety reasons to what we did last time, we'll give it a value of 1, because if we don't want to use the multiplier, or the multiplier is not active at a given time, it's going to be times 1, which will keep it the same as what it was. It won't actually add a multiplier. That's a nice, safe way to do that. And then the other thing I need is, that's one way for me to be able to access that. But another thing I need is a way to make that multiplier accessible to code elsewhere in my project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a property called score multiplier here that other things can see, because right now that multiplier is kind of a hidden thing. And I'm going to now use a little technique here. I won't go into the details of this because it's kind of arcane, to make that available to other things. And it's the same pattern I'm using elsewhere here. So we're going to return m underscore multiplier for our get. We actually saw this yesterday too. And we're going to have our set say m underscore multiplier equals value. Okay, and what I did just there makes this available to things elsewhere in the game. So that's good. I'll save that. And then Natalie, going back into Unity, you said this was available in the drone damage script?
That's right.
Okay. And just want to check one. It's not that I don't believe you, Natalie. I just want to make sure, because I know we have some scripts that are like updated versions of scripts here. Mm-hmm. And I want to make sure.
It's attached to a child of that object, so you need to open it in the prefab editor and unroll it.
Oh, okay. There it is. And it's on probably the drone, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Drone damage script, and we'll edit that one. I want to make sure I'm hitting the right one. Okay, there it is. So this is the script that handles when the drone takes damage. And you can see this is the point value you get for by destroying the drone, which is something the designer can set in the inspector with a default value of 100. And let's take a look at our code here. And we have our on collision here. Okay. Oh, but where actually is the code where it's destroyed? Am I missing that?
It has to do with when its health is less than 0. And when
there it is. Got it. I wasn't seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here is this code. So, this is code, and we mentioned this yesterday. Actually, this is exactly what we were talking about yesterday. This block of code, this on collision enter, which we talked about yesterday, is code that runs when the drone collides with something. It runs one time, that very first frame, as we talked about yesterday, when they collide. And you can see it does a couple of things. The first thing it does is it checks to see, and again, without going into the details, if the object that it's colliding with is a hostile, is a player laser bolt, right? Because this code will run anytime it collides with something. We only want it to do stuff when the thing it collides with is a laser bolt. So first it checks for that. And here's the code that depletes its health by the damage amount that's inflicted by the laser bolt. And we messed with the other side of this yesterday to apply the crits to that. The next thing that happens here after that, and you can see all that's inside this one conditional statement. The next thing that happens on a collision, and will happen after that health reduction is applied, if it's to be applied, is the drone checks to see its current health value. If its current health value is less than or equal to 0, so if it's now been, had its health be depleted, it's going to do a number of things uh, that will basically correspond with what we want to happen when it's destroyed. There it is, Natalie. You took the blue pill. You shrunk. Excellent.
I knew it was going to
It
happen.
was going to happen eventually. So right here is the line of code we care about. It is adding the point value associated with this object to your score when you've destroyed it, which is indeed what we want. But now that we have support for the multiplier, we want to make it take that into account too. And the way we do that is, and again, what this line means is to your overall score, add the point value to it. And what we want to do instead is we want to add the point value times the score multiplier value we have in our game object. And this will work, again, right now, if we were to run this, this would have no effect on our overall gameplay because that value is set to 1 by default. So it would still be saying your point value times 1, same as your point value. But if a multiplier was active, it would apply the multiplied value. And as we talked about the other day, the part of the code that sets whether a multiplier is active right now or not, we're not doing today. That's not part of this work. That will come after we get, or as part of getting the Wave Manager system in place. So we don't have to do that side of it. So this was all I had to add to get the base support in, Natalie. And now that is officially there. In the interest of time, normally I would test this. But I'm confident enough in the implementation and I don't want to waste time testing it because we got a lot to get to today. We're just going to assume that works and leave it at that. So I've saved that now. Now, I just did some work over here on my computer at my house, and we're going to hand off to Natalie for the implementation now to continue it. But I've just done that work, and I've only saved it locally here on my computer. And a natural question that comes up is, well, does Natalie get the latest version of the project? And in general, this happens a lot on game teams because you can have people working on stuff at the same time. I'm an artist. I'm working on a new 3D model. I'm a level designer. I'm making a new level. I'm an engineer. I'm over here coding things. And those 3 different people are all working at the same time. So how do they keep their stuff in sync? Well, the answer is there's a concept, and you may have been familiar with it if you've done some other software development, called source control. And what this is there is a central online place where all of our code, we sync it to when we make changes, and we pull down from it to get the changes other people working on our team have made. There are a variety of systems that you can use to do this. Unity provides one you can use called Unity Collaborator, Unity Colab, that we're using. And the reason we're using it is it's very simple, it's straightforward, and it integrates nicely with the Unity editor. And these systems can get pretty advanced. They can do things like let me work on something in parallel with Natalie working on something, and then sync it up and deal intelligently when there are conflicts between what we're working on. Right now, since only Natalie or I is working on anything at a given time, stuff like that doesn't come into play. But I still need to get Natalie all of my changes, right? So right now, if you look in the upper right corner of the Unity interface, there's this little drop down that says Colab. And it has right now for me a blue up arrow on it. And when I hover over it, it says you have files to publish. What that means is I've made changes locally on my computer that I haven't pushed up and synchronized to this remote repository yet. I want to do that so Natalie has them. And all I do in Unity Colab to do that is I click that drop down. And this is true in most source control. You want to describe what you just did with a brief description because this whole history is tracked. And we can do things like if I put something up here and I made a big mistake in it and I broke the whole project, we can roll back to an earlier version. So these descriptions are important. So the only change I made here was base, and I'll describe it quickly, base support for multipliers in Game Manager and Drone. And now you can see below here, it actually, Unity knows what files I changed. I changed those two scripts, my drone damage script and my game state manager script. And if I say publish now, it's going to do a little sync. It'll give me progress. It's now synced those to the remote online repository. And now I'm up to date. I have the latest thing because I had it already. Now, Natalie, with that done, I am going to hand off to you, and you can pick up right there, starting with what you're going to do to actually get those changes, and then going with the drone implementation. So, Natalie, I'm going to go back to sharing your screen now instead of mine.
Sounds good. So when my screen comes up, hopefully I don't shrink suddenly, but if it happens, we'll deal with the tiny Natalie head at that time. So, again, a consequence of the remote magic of showing my computer, as well as Brian's. So I've got my Unity open here, and of course you can see this is now Natalie's computer. I've got the light theme for Unity. Brian has the dark theme. And I am going to pull Brian's changes by heading right back up to that collab button. He had an arrow pointing up that would allow him to push changes into this cloud that's storing all of our data. And now I can pull those changes out of the cloud and locally onto my computer. So luckily that was just some scripts, so it won't take long for me to download those changes. And now, as soon as we circle around and pull the full download, we'll be on the same version of the project. Of course, one thing to keep in mind when you do source control like this is that it's not like Google Docs, so we can't open the same script at the same time and see the other person's cursor. And in fact, if I had locally edited that same script, Brian, I think you edited the game state manager.
Correct.
If I had edited the game state manager on my own computer, we would have what's called a conflict between the two versions of the file. And we would actually have to decide, did we want Brian's or did we want mine? So it's really useful because we can do this remote collaboration, but we do have to be a little bit careful that we don't assume it has the power of Google Docs, because it's not just one document. It's all kinds of files. We've got code, we've got assets, 3D models, and we kind of alternate who controls which sub piece of the project.
Yeah, and we don't want to go into too much detail on it, but the history of how this problem of source control and of dealing with conflicts has been handled in the history of software development is pretty interesting. When I first started my career 20 years ago, it worked in a very different way. So it used to be when I was working on something, it locked Natalie out, right? Natalie couldn't even make changes. The environment wouldn't let her change something when I had a lock on it. But then somebody who was pretty smart figured out conflicts actually happen way less often than you think, and there are other ways to handle them. And that's when this model was introduced, where you only try to resolve the conflicts when they come up. You don't lock people out. Anybody can work on anything at any time.
Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to talk a little bit about doing the Wave Manager. And I wanted to, before I get into the code, I wanted to talk a little bit about implementing a new system in a game. And what I mean by that is, what you've seen Brian doing up to now is he's been editing scripts. He's extending the functionality of what we started with. So when Brian does that work, he looks at the scripts, he opens one, and then he adds some code into that script to get it to do what he wants to do. And that's a lot of what you do when you mod a game. You open scripts, you add more things into them, and thereby you get the behavior out of the game that you want. However, sometimes you need to write a brand new script. And we typically create a brand new script when we're going to create a brand new system in the game. So we've been calling this a wave manager. And when we say the word manager, that's a good clue that we're talking about adding a game system and not just extending an existing script. Now, I point this out because a common thing to do when you're new to game programming is to put everything in the game in one script. I've seen this a lot, and it technically doesn't break your project. There's nothing wrong with doing it. However, it's hard to continually update and improve the game when you have a gigantic multi-purpose script that contains everything that the game is and does. The most common script where that happens, Brian, do you have a guess about where all of that stuff ends up in a single script project?
I would have to guess the game manager.
That is a really strong guess. It's also wrong. And you're wrong because you know too much about game programming.
Oh, all right. I have another. Can I make another guess?
Yes.
The player controller script.
Ding! That is
Aha.
absolutely
Okay.
right. Yes. So, in fact, a lot of folks who start programming, and this may be you if you're watching this cast, don't know what a game manager is. And so what ends up happening is we see that player controller script. It's one of the most basic systems we need in a game. And then there's tiny me.
Yep, you shrunk again.
When we start adding things to the game, we put everything in the player controller, when it would be better to put it all in the game manager. Or ideally, we do this modular form of game development where we put different systems in different scripts. So in the spirit of that, what I actually like to do is sort of think about the systems in a game and how I would represent those as different modular scripts. So what I have with Brian is, of course, he's made this game, and I can just sort of take a look at it and draw conclusions. But let's just take a lightning fast look at the scripts that are there in terms of how that's been so nicely modularized by someone like Brian, who does know about a game manager and didn't put it all in the player controller. I've got the list there. It's, of course, right behind Brian's head in the cast. But I like to look at it with that list view so I can see the full name of the script. That's right. He's dodging out of the way. Woo! The magic.
I've rendered us invisible. That should help too.
We just disappear behind the window, right? So, and the cool thing about doing this is like, what I'm going to need to do in a minute here when I bring up the Wave Manager script and talk about it, one of the important things in that implementation is I need data from the game that is already somewhere in the game. And I'm going to need to do a very similar thing to what Brian just did with the multipliers, where I need to get the score in the game. And if I need to do that, what I need to do is know where that is and how I can get access to it. So with the idea of that necessity in the implementation of this new system I want to do, I can look at the scripts and just sort of say to myself, okay, what do all of these scripts do? So I see at the top there, drone damage, enemy behavior, enemy laser bolt behavior, and fire projectile. And just looking at those at the top, I'm thinking I've got some enemy drone functionalities there. And then fire projectile is probably to do with the gun that I am shooting. I see first person mouse controller. I believe in this game that is the player controller. Is that right, Brian?
It's the player controller when you're operating in the mode of non-VR, like we're doing when we test it, when you're using your mouse and your keyboard.
Got it. So that's going to take input and control things like me looking at the shield, probably. What else? Do you know what else is in there or have a guess?
I think it's almost exclusively input handling.
Yep. Again, a good reason not to put the logic that I'm implementing in that script. it would be so counterintuitive to manage waves in a script that's fundamentally about taking input.
Yeah, and it's a good example of modularity too, Natalie, because I can tell you in the history of the project, first I made it for VR, and then after I had it working in VR, I was like, oh crap, I guess we got to figure out how to make this work in development mode, or if people want to mess with it and they don't have VR. And so the whole support of the mouse and keyboard input was an afterthought, right? And because the project was modular to begin with, I was able to create a separate input system for mouse and keyboard in that script and then connect it up with my existing gameplay logic without breaking anything in the VR implementation.
Right. So right there, a perfect example of why this sort of approach is super important. All right. So game state manager, spoilers, that's the one we want. And Brian sort of alluded to this when he was talking about the multipliers, because essentially that's the one that kind of keep tracks of like, are you alive? Did you die? Is the game paused? Is the game running? What sort of state is the game as a whole in? And a thing like score and often health is kept track of in that script. So I know that just because I understand how a game project is sort of divided up. And so I know I'm going to want to deal with that script when I write the new one that I am doing. After that on the list, we have laser bolt behavior, looks like more shooting. We have spawner. I may need to do some work there because I know that we're going to try to add to the spawn rate and speed and so forth of the enemies that are popping out in later waves. So I'm marking that one in my head as important as well. And then at the bottom, we have wave manager, which is the script that I'm going to work on now. So
now, Wave Manager, Natalie, wasn't something that was there originally, right?
It was not there originally. In fact, I worked on this before the cast because I wanted to make sure that it worked so that I didn't end up hitting a bug. And like I said, it's sort of like when I program, I'm kind of like the way I am in Gamestar mechanic, where it's like, oh, I jumped down. So indeed, this is a script I wrote this afternoon. And I'm going to take you guys through the logic I built for this a little bit, and then we can test it out and maybe tweak with it and understand how the behavior relates with the code that I generated.
Yeah, and Natalie, just I wasn't in asking the question, I wasn't trying to have you reveal all of your secrets. I didn't want anyone to be confused because, as folks knew from when we were talking about this mod in the beginning, there were no waves. What we're trying to do is add waves. So a natural question might be, well, if there were no waves in the game, why is there a wave manager script?
There?
And the answer is there wasn't. It's Natalie has worked ahead a little bit in preparation for the cast and already created the script she otherwise would be creating from scratch.
Exactly. The TLDR of that is I put that there.
Okay, you did build that.
Yep.
Okay.
So exactly. So I've got it on the screen here, and it's actually not that big. I've got a really basic implementation for you guys. I don't have multipliers in yet, so if we have time on the cast today, we might be able to add that in. But we'll see where we get with the logic of this, and hopefully we can check out a little gameplay with waves right at the end of the cast.
Sweet.
So, I always feel like at this moment, I'm like, oh, coding, I just want to do it. But I feel a bit compelled to pull up the implementation plan. And if you guys give me a second, I have it somewhere.
Do you want me to bring it up on my screen, Natalie? Because I have it right here.
That would be great, Brian. Yeah, I've lost it in my many windows.
Okay, here, I'll bring it up. Not that one, but that one. Okay.
Yep. So.
Oh, and so first of all, before you get going, just real quickly, Natalie, we can check off support and scoring system for multipliers because I just did that.
Exactly.
So that's done. Okay.
Yep. So rather than just going through from scratch, right, let's hit the most important points first, which are, these things in this bulleted list, which are the design that I was implementing when I wrote this script. So we want a wave manager system. I've represented that as the wave manager script. And this script needs to maintain the current wave state. So what wave are we on? It needs to detect when the conditions that trigger a new wave have been satisfied, which is, of course, it needs to get information about how many points the player has, because what we're doing in this implementation is, according to how many points you have, we're in a particular wave. Next, when you're in a particular wave, we want to be able to change the game, essentially making the enemies increasingly more challenging as the waves progress. So these bullets at the bottom say things like rate of enemy spawning, which enemies spawn, enemy settings, so forth. So that's sort of like a cascading set of design requirements. And let's try to go in that order when we look at this script.
Sounds
so, Brian,
good.
if you would, bring us back, we can check the script out.
Okay, script is up.
Cool. Okay. So I've got my script here, and since you've been watching along, hopefully, with some of Brian's great tutorials about this initial material. By the way, if you haven't, you can watch all of our past live casts on YouTube and check out some of that material. So you know that I've got some really nice stuff here that sets parameters that can be edited in the Unity editor. The variable I set to keep track of the current wave is not one that's editable in the Unity editor. It's a private variable called current wave. I made that internal to the script. I made it a simple integer, and that is how I'm representing the current wave that we are on. So that's actually what I started with, because it was at the start of the implementation plan. I said I need a variable that keeps track of what wave we're on. So I put that down there. There's a few ways you can initialize variables. Brian, I don't know if we have time to get into variable initializing, but I actually set it to 0 here in the start method, which is a method that runs right when the game starts. So
yeah, it's probably
it doesn't run every. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's probably worth pausing over that. And you were going to do it anyway, Natalie. I apologize for interrupting you. But this is another one of those events. Yesterday we talked about collisions, which are an event that can happen anytime, in a game when a certain condition is met, when two things happen to bump into each other. There are other events in games and in Unity that are that happen on a regular, predictable basis. Start is an example of an event like that. The start event happens exactly one time, and that's either at the beginning of the game, if the object is present in the world at the beginning of the game, or when the object spawns into the world, if it's something that spawns in. Now, in this case, this wave manager, Natalie, is going to be present at the start of the game. So this start code will run only one time when the game first starts.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
And as you're noting, a very common thing in Unity you do in a start method is, if you have to set a value of a variable, for what value it should have at the start of the game, this is where you do it.
Yes, exactly. So I've got that, I set that up there, and that's all I needed to do to fulfill that bullet point. I'm going to use it later, but representing it in code was just writing a couple of lines. Now, remind me what bullet 2 is. I already forgot.
Oh, that's a good question. Bullet 2 is detect when the conditions that trigger a new wave have been satisfied, i.e. the point threshold.
Exactly. And so that's not going to be just a line of code. And that is because I need to get a reference to the game manager. And this is what I alluded to earlier in this sort of evaluating the existing scripts and figuring out what they do. Um, when I had that conversation, I said, I'm going to need to make use of the game manager to get the point value. And at this moment in my wave manager script, I need to do what's called getting a reference. And essentially what that is I need a way to connect up with the game manager that's running in the game when I press play, and then asking that script, what is the current value of the player's score? So referencing this idea of connecting up with other scripts that themselves have important data that we want to use and maybe interact with is really important when you have a modular game project. If I had it all in one script, I would just sort of use it. But because we value having things divided up in this way, I need a way of accessing the game manager. So up here, there are multiple ways of doing this. I actually saw Brian did it a different way in another script. But I actually created a field in the inspector where I could what's called passing in. I could pass in a reference to the game manager that's in the game. So let me show you what this looks like in the Unity editor. I've got my wave manager loaded here, and we'll ignore what I've got down here because I haven't explained it yet. But you can see here I've got this open field where I can pass in the game manager that's present in the game. That is here. So if I want to connect these two scripts and give Wave Manager access to the data in Game Manager, what I can do is just drag this object over into this field and drop it. And now I've established that connection.
Yeah, that's such an important concept in Unity, and it's worth pausing over again just for 30 seconds, because when we've been working in the inspector before, like the stuff I've been doing over the last few days, when we put values into the inspector, they've always been things like numbers, right? You know, like, oh, we want the crit rate to be 0.25, and we type that in or we adjust it with the slider. And I think I may have shown some examples of some points of like when you have a true false value, you get a checkbox. Or sometimes you can type text directly in. Sometimes you can get a drop-down list, right? But another thing you can do is have references to other objects or scripts. And when you do that, you get this interface that Natalie is making use of right here to actually be able to drag and drop a reference over there. And to be clear, Natalie, there are times in the project where I've also done that on my scripts. I believe the game manager script itself has a bunch of that, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And as you say, there are many techniques you can use to do that. That's just one of them. Another one, we won't show it, but another one you can do is Unity has some built-in support where you can actually say, hey, find, Unity, go do, and you say this in your code, Unity, go do the work for me to find this object, right? And there are actually multiple variations you can do on that. And those are the two basic methods you would use for this. I would say the find one that I'm describing is the one that's more typically used by professional developers when they have to do this. This one, I think this one, as you say, works perfectly well. And it's a little bit more useful, I think, and intuitive if you're just starting out. To make this kind of the connections between the scripts more real, exactly like you're trying to do, Natalie.
Yep. Yeah. And of course, this is brittle because if I lose that reference, I'll have to drag that over once again. And that's a common problem when you implement things in this style. Sometimes you find yourself doing a lot of dragging and dropping. But when you're starting out, that dragging and dropping, I think, is important because it helps you understand that when you have that list of scripts, what you're seeing here, you've got this kind of network of code, and then you're drawing lines between those nodes to connect them and give them access to each other's data.
Yep.
And, that kind of web is the underlying architecture of a game project.
And again, I'm super glad you brought that up, Natalie, because you use the phrase that this method, this is what it's good for, this is what it's not so good for, right? It's great for showing that web of connections. It's the downside is you use the word brittle, which means it's kind of fragile. It can kind of break. If you screw up stuff in the inspector, you can break your whole game because you don't have a reference you need, right? A lot of programming is dealing with the choices between options and knowing through experience or through thinking it through what the goods and bads are and what are the trade-offs you want to make. So for example, the find method that I described is less brittle because it's going to find it, assuming it's there at all, it's going to find it no matter what, right? The
Yep.
downside of it is it's computationally expensive, right? Because Unity's got to do work to parse through all the objects in your game, search through them and find what they want. That takes resources from the computer. So, for example, if you're using find, you don't want to like do it all the time. For example, you wouldn't want to have to try to find something every single frame, right? You wouldn't want to be finding it 60 times or 100 and something times per second, because that's going to make your game grind to a halt, because find is such an expensive operation. So typically, if you have to do a find an object, you do it in the start event, like Natalie showed us before, which will only run once. You find it one time, then you have the reference to it. You don't need to find it again. But even that has a little impact on how quickly your game starts up, because it'll do that find when the game starts.
Exactly. So we're close to the end of our time here, and I want to just wrap up this discussion of referencing the game manager and just show you guys how I used that in this script. And then when we livecast tomorrow, we can come back here and talk a little bit about arrays and for loops, which are also two important programming structures that inform the way I built
I
this.
gotta say, Natalie, how it's really interesting that even though we didn't set out to do it, and we picked a random collection of things and took suggestions and came up with what we were going to do in the mod. It's so fascinating how it just works out that we're covering so many foundational computer science topics that are really, really important. I swear that
I
wasn't
know.
a plant. It wasn't planned, but it's funny how it's working out that way.
I'm a huge fan of it.
Cool. So I'm sorry. Please continue.
Sure, sure. So, there's just a final kind of last thing for that. So, um, right here, I used Brian's nice formatting. I copied this from one of his scripts to include the header. My tooltip is blank. I could probably fill that in and say game manager reference. Um, Now, once I'm connected up with the instance of this game manager that's in the game, I can access data in that instance and use it to run logic, which was our second bullet point. And again, the variable that points to that game manager in the game is this one I named game state manager. So down here, I've got this if conditional, which Brian teased last time, and then we talked a little bit about what that was. I just type GameStateManager.score, which is, I believe, what you just did as well when you implemented your multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get whatever the current score is with that score variable. Again, we have this dot operator, which means it's part of it, like a sub part of or belongs to game state manager, which is that instance of the game manager. So this little bit of code here is basically, in plain English, the player's current score. And I did have to go through a little bit of logical exploration to get this in my script, right? Like I have to understand which script is keeping track of that and how to connect to that script. Once I do that, I can just write this line of code where I type the variable name and then the actual variable that labels the data that I want. And I can proceed on with the rest of the logic, whatever that score is. So I feel like this is a good place to stop.
Okay.
The teaser, of course, is, look at this. I've got a conditional, and then inside it, I've got this for loop. So that'll be a little bit interesting for us to pull apart on the next cast, Brian, and just talking about, um, what all of this is doing. I've got current wave here. I've got arrays in the inspector. It'll be a juicy one, I think, for Friday.
Natalie, I have to say, in your caster skills, you're getting very strong with the very professional, broadcaster, radio broadcaster, teases there of what we're going to do next, to dive into the juicy
Definitely.
heart of four
I
loops.
know, I know. I just feel
Um,
like programming has that vibe. It's like I'm about to eat like a cherry or an apple or something. I just ooh.
yeah, or possibly more like an onion, because every time you peel a layer away, there's another layer. But that's not as
And there's
appetizing.
crying.
And there's often cry. Nice. Cool. Well, I think that is a good place to end today, on a funny note. So thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye, guys.